Welcome everybody. I'm Charles Grant from the Centre for European Reform. This meeting is held jointly with the Hans Seidel Foundation and our friend Anya Richter from the Hans Seidel Foundation. So great to have you with us, Anya. Thanks for supporting this event. We've got two speakers today, only one of whom is with us in person because British Airways cancelled Marco Buti's flight in from Florence yesterday. But the good news is we have them online instead, so we haven't lost Marco at all. We also have Catherine Day, whose flight managed to get through the storm, which is great. Marco, would you like to kick off first? You want to speak first, Marco?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll bring you in just a second. Let me just say what the meeting's about. The meeting is about the future of the European Commission, a small subject. It used to be more interesting to people in London than it is now, but I still think it's a very interesting subject. I'd like to know whether the second von der Leyen Commission will be different from the first one. The first one had a lot of emphasis on green issues in particular. I think probably among them might speculate that could be less of an issue for the second von der Leyen Commission. I think defence is going to be more important than the second one. The first one was also noted for what people call this extreme centralisation. Most of the key decisions in the Commission were taken by von der Leyen and her chief assistants, like Bjorn Seibert, her chief of staff. Is that going to be the case in the second Commission as well? We can speculate on that. To what extent will the geopolitical situation in the world affect the way the Commission develops? She said in the previous Commission that she wanted a geopolitical Commission, but how geopolitical can it be? Should it be? Will it be? These are some of the questions I think we'll touch upon. I'm sure as well. Essentially, the point of today's seminar is to say, what will the future of the European Commission be? What role will it play? So with that, I'll turn now to Marco to kick us off. Marco, of course, was the Director General for Economics for very many years. He's now at the European University Institute in Florence. And thank you for joining us, Marco. Let's hear how do you see the future of the Commission?
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. We usually say when we connect remotely that we are sorry not to be there. It's not always the case, but this time is really the case. And I was blocked by yesterday's misadventures, between flights and other things, so I could not join. In particular, not to see Charles because I see him regularly. Ditchley Park and other events, but to see Catherine, who I have not seen for a little while. So, okay, really sorry, but here we are. Pleased to be with you anyway. Okay, Charles, to kick off, I'll make 5 points. 3 on institutional/governance, 2 on policies. So, first point is Ursula von der Leyen Commission number 2. Is going to be a very centralized commission. This is not a surprise. Actually, Catherine knows that. It's basically the law of large numbers. It is since Barroso I, when we had the big enlargement to the east, that in order to make the commission work, we need to have a strong center. So this is, I think, is going to be a fact. If one looks at the portfolios, the way they have been designed, they are very intertwined. So it means that basically the president, her head of cabinet, will intervene not only in fine, but also very much at the beginning throughout all the stages. I'm expecting also that in the light of this, that the roles that has been much discussed of executive vice presidents, their coordinating roles, I think, would not be that strong in this in Ursula 2 compared to Ursula 1. There is one thing that one has to consider, and that is important, I think. If one looks at the votes in the European Parliament, between vote for the president and vote for the college, for the first time ever, the college got less vote than the president. Usually what happened in the past, you have the battle for choosing the president, and then there is the appeasement. In the subsequent stage, where and then there is a vote that is on the college that is more consensual than the one for the president. This time it has not happened. I think it is an issue, and I think I would dare to say more for the parliament than for the commission. I mean, basically, the parliament has not really been able to stand up and overcome national boundaries and national logics that instead he had been able to do it in the past. So I think, and this is particularly relevant, I think, in a negative way because of the challenges that we have in front of us. So one would have expected the parliament to actually show more maturity, let's put it like that. Things that does not happen. Second point is this is a college with a strong Nordic traction. The key element in the next 5 years, and we will see it immediately, we see it already, is the nexus between economy and security. So if you see the distribution of portfolios, the 3 commissioners coming from the Baltics are actually in charge of this. You have Kaja Kallas as the high representative, so foreign minister, let's say, in inverted commas. You have Andrius Kubilius on defense, and you have Valdis Dombrovskis on the economy. The commissioners do not represent their countries, clearly, we know that. It is an important tenet of the treaty. But 3 commissioners coming from 6 million aggregate population, I think is on such a key portfolio is actually a novelty. So I think the challenge here would be to make sure that this Nordic traction here, which extends also to Poland on the defense issues, whether that would be able also to provide a political equilibrium for countries coming more from the south. I mentioned Poland. I think a key character in the new college will be Piotr Serafin, who is the budget commissioner. He was head of cabinet of Tusk when Donald Tusk was president of the European Council. He is a very consummate operator. And I think he is going to play a key role on the budget. I'll come when I talk about policies in a moment. Finally, on the college composition, I think again on the Nordic traction, it is going to be very interesting to see the position of Henna Virkkunen, who is the executive vice president in charge of the digital transition. We have behind us Thierry Breton with a pretty muscular approach and also with controversies with Elon Musk not long ago, actually, just during the summer. We'll have to see what kind of positions the new executive vice president for digital transition will take. Third point, we have a strong commission president and we have very weak national leaders. Very weak national leaders. So usually, and Catherine knows that very well, better than me, when you have to cross red lines, usually the engine is the Franco-German one, and then the commission comes in, polishes it and put it in the proper format to make sure that we cross the red lines, in an institutionally robust manner. For the time being, the engine is sputtering. It doesn't work, the Franco-German. And if one looks around, there are really no strong leaders who can play this role here. This means that since it will be necessary to cross red lines, the initiative will have to come from the EU institutions in the first place. And here I have to say, I mentioned strong role of Ursula von der Leyen. I mentioned also, and it is an opportunity, the potential strong role of Antonio Costa. We have behind us horrible relations between the two sides of Rue de la Loi, with Charles Michel and Ursula von der Leyen. I mean, Antonio Costa is a much more skilled operator. He enjoys fully the trust of the European Council. So if the two work together well, I think that can help to have this EU institutional leaders. Now, what do we see as from this viewpoint as the first moves, especially the Commission President? I think there are two things that are worth signaling. One, he has been mentioned when she went to the European Parliament for the vote on the college. She will launch a first dialogue with the automotive sector. First point. Second point, she has made the courageous decision to fly to the other side of the Atlantic to sign the Mercosur agreement. Okay, you can read these two moves in two opposite ways. One basically pleasing the German constituency on both sides. Second, showing to Donald Trump that things can be done in a different way than raising the challenges and risking trade war. And free trade agreement is bottom up is the right thing to do. And for the automotive, maybe convincing them not to ditch the green transition. We will have to see what comes out of all this. Fourth point, there is always, when we make important moves, let's say a trigger. During the, 4 years ago, it was during the pandemic, it was the response to the pandemic, it led to Next Generation EU. If one looks for a policy trigger now, it is clearly defense. I think this is rather clear. So there are talks now, there was in the FT on Friday, of a new fund, some 500 billion. I think here, just to put a bit of flesh on the bones, we could use Article 122 to create something like this. Unlike all the previous colleges, Ursula von der Leyen 1 can be remembered as the Article 122 Commission. I think it has been used a dozen times, whilst in the past, this remote article has almost never been used. This allows the Commission and the EU to venture into areas where there is no a community competence. So for vaccines, for Next Generation EU, that was used for several other decisions in the past year. Now, there is talks also about, and I think interesting for you, possibly the UK joining an initiative of this sort. I think on defense security makes absolute sense, and I hope the conditions are created for that. This has an implication, I think, for the design of this fund. Next Generation EU was the EU borrowing was allowed by using the margin between spending and the own resources. This is a typical community technique. Instead, for something like this, I think is more likely to be a construction based on joint national guarantees. So that would allow also countries outside the EU potentially to come in by doing their share. So the model here is not so much Next Generation EU, but is the SURE model that we launched during the pandemic to support the labor market, which was built on national guarantees. So that is my fourth point. My final point, and I apologize for being too long. I think there is a need of, let's say, vertical coordination. So between what we do at the national level, what we do at the European level. The EU budget, apart from Next Generation EU, I think it was asked 20 years ago when I myself contributed to write the CER report. At the time, we said that the EU budget is a national relic. Apart from Next Generation EU, it is still a national relic. A past relic. Why so? Because the EU budget has changed a lot, but reality has gone even further away. So I think we need to reform the EU budget. I think we have to review the EU spending based on European public goods, and the one in the insecurity is definitely one of them. I think there will be a generalization of the next generation EU method, mainly transfer in exchange for reforms and investment at the national level. I think this is a promising development, and I really hope that we do not end up into a Draghi a la carte. So picking and choosing what is easier and leaving out what is more difficult. Here again, I conclude, when we have problems we find in the money, we usually double down on regulation. When we have problems with regulation, we set up a governance or coordination process. I think money, regulation, and governance will have to go hand in hand, and that's going to be one of the institutional challenges looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. Catherine, how does it look to you?
Well, I can easily follow on a lot of what Marco has said. I think the von der Leyen Commission takes office obviously in a very difficult time. There's going to be multiple crises happening. She recently talked about taking office for the second time in a contested world where every weakness is weaponized. And she talked about Europe's struggle, eternal struggle for freedom and democracy. So I think she's well aware of how difficult it's going to be. But I see very much a confident second-term president. As Marco has said, it will be presidential, not only because of the 2004 enlargement and the numbers, but also because of the Lisbon Treaty, elevating the European Council to a really functioning institution. And that means that the Commission has to get its act together, has to have a program. The president has to take responsibility for everything. You can't have what we had in the old days, lots of commissioners coming out with uncoordinated initiatives. This is going to be much more streamlined to be effective. And I think we just have to remember that she won her own vote in Parliament. She got all her commissioners through unscathed. She pushed member states who didn't want to nominate women and went from 5 to 11. So she has had a lot of her own way. Now, it's not all due to her own persuasive powers, obviously, but it's also due to being a member of the EPP, the biggest party in the Parliament. She has, I think, 15 commissioners from the EPP. So she's comfortable that she can work in this environment. And she has very much structured the new commission to suit her, as Marco has explained. It will be very presidential. But then we were long enough in the commission to remember the days of Delors. That was equally very presidential. I think it is up to the individual commissioners to make it work. And it's up to the executive vice presidents to make it work. If they can learn how to work together, I think that they can do the kind of cross-policy coordination which is needed in the modern world. It's not about individual portfolios anymore. It's about how you knit them together, how you make them work in a complementary fashion. So I think that's the challenge for them. She very clearly set out what she wants to do in her speech to the Parliament on the vote on her commission. She wants to build on past priorities like the Green Deal. I don't think that she's going to abandon it, but I think the words will be different. Renewable energy will become a feature of security as much of the green agenda, for example. So I think a lot of things will be done, but they will have new labels on them. She also showed that she has used her first 5 years to think about what she wants to do. So she has set out a number of things that the new commission will present in the first 100 days. Now, very few of the new commissioners will have time in 100 days to really work out the policies, but she will have an oven-ready one that she will produce. So a competitiveness compass built on the Draghi report. I'm afraid, I think, Marco, it will be Draghi a la carte, but as long as they pick the right main dishes, it should work. A clean industrial deal, which she describes as building both decarbonisation and innovation. So again, the aspects of the Green Deal will be there, but with a different label, and a white paper on defence, which she has already said will go, where the EU has to go hand in hand with NATO and has to increase defence spending. She also, Marco has touched on the car industry one, and she has also put an emphasis on simplification, which is very desirable. I think the EU regulation has become overcomplicated. It's not only the fault of the Commission. Every member state puts in a little bit, every MEP puts in a little bit, and the spirit of compromise gathers them all together and says that's good enough. I think there may have to be much more discipline now if member states in particular really want simplification. I spent a lot of time on that in my time, and I know how difficult it is. It's desirable, but it's very hard to get people to agree on which bit will we simplify. Everybody has a stake in past deals that were done, but it's nonetheless a worthy thing. I think one of the most difficult dossiers in the new Commission will be the budget, because all these things have to be paid for. But I do see it as being also something that's clarifying, because we will have to go from an EU budget of around 1% of EU GDP to maybe 3%, maybe 5%. I think Europe has been doing a certain amount of freeloading, but also it was operating in a world which suited it, and it's not going to suit us as well anymore. So there will have to be a much bigger budget. She has also said that she wants the funding to be more focused on the key priorities. There are too many programs, it's too much overlap, again, because of the number of multiple actors who are involved in finding any compromise. I do think, and maybe Marco might want to come back on this, the precedent, the first time the EU does something, it's never a precedent, but it is always a precedent. And the precedent of funding the recovery plan through going to the market on Eurobonds, that will have to be repeated, because member state budgets will not produce the kind of lift that's needed in the budget. And it's a perfectly legitimate and respectable way of funding the EU budget, I think. I think the Commission will have to not only step up on new areas like defence and security, but also ongoing issues like migration, a very divisive issue, enlargement, which is going to be very, very difficult. Again, the aspirations are clear, but making it happen is going to be a huge agenda. And then I think just working out the trade, but I do see von der Leyen's quick trip to South America to sign the Mercosur agreement as a sign that the Commission at least will be brave and will kind of put it up to the member states and the Parliament to say yay or nay, but the Commission will have done its job. So I see that as a mark of a confidence of a second-term president who says, well, I'll put it out there and we'll see what happens. And I agree with Marco. I think at a time when France and Germany aren't working, although we have all lived through lots of times when they weren't working. And my fear was not always when France and Germany would agree, but when France and Germany would agree a bad deal for the sake of agreeing. So, you know, it's a common feature of life in the EU. But I do think that this is a time when the institutions with the right people at the helm could really make a difference. Both Costa and von der Leyen have said that they want to work together, they want to reinforce each other, which is an interesting terminology. And I think if they, together with the High Rep and Metsola and the European Parliament, if the four of them can agree on a shape of an agenda or in a shape of the big things that need to be dealt with, that can start a different kind of discussion in the European Council, in the Parliament, than we have seen for quite a long time. And so I think the European institutions are never shy of stepping forward in a crisis. And I think that's what you will see. And I think Antonio Costa has a reputation for being good at forging compromises. I think von der Leyen is wanting to have somebody she can work with at that level. So I think there is a lot to be said for bringing the technical ability of the Commission together with an ability of a skilled President of the European Council to foster compromises. I think the European Parliament will be less predictable. It was never predictable, but less predictable than it has been. But I do think they will be as much issue-based as party-based. It will depend on what the topic is. It will depend on the kind of proposal that comes to them. And I think more often than not, the centre ground will hold. So I do think that the EU will survive the coming crisis, but it will always find the latest, most expensive, most cumbersome way of doing it, because the Commission and the Parliament think Europe-wide all the time. Member states think nationally 99% of the time. It's only when a crisis affects most of the EU that they then say, oh, maybe there's a European solution. And then it will be late. I think the crisis will have to get much worse before the European solution becomes a reality, but I think it will be there in the end, because I think all of the existing member states know that for them, the EU has to survive. It's an existential thing. I don't think the UK thought that, but the current member states do. They know that their countries have a better chance in the EU than outside of it. And if you look at Greece didn't want to leave either the Euro or the EU, Orban holds in there. They all know that their destinies are intertwined. So it will take them a long time to get up the hill each time, but I firmly believe that they will do it. And that brings me to a subject that is really very contentious. And when she said this in her late speech in Strasbourg, I think a shudder went through the Irish population anyway when she mentioned the words treaty change, because it's the one thing we don't want to hear about. But I think at least in the medium term, we have to look at that, because if we are aiming for a bigger EU, and I think enlargement will happen, it will take time, it will be complicated, but we will have to make certain reforms, because, and Marco already hinted at this, I think the future EU will be much less West European than we in this part of the EU are used to. And we haven't got our heads around that yet. But it is something we will have to think through, and it will be different in the future. And it's only by morphing from the original 6 through all of the stages that we've been through since, but by morphing into the reality of what is the best interest of the groups that make it up, that the EU has managed to survive through thick and thin. So I'm fundamentally a believer that it will come through the crisis, but that it will be late and expensive. But it's a rich part of the world. It's able to afford the compromises that are needed. And I think for me, it was very interesting that she didn't mention the word Brexit in her recent Strasbourg speech. I think that's both a sign that continental Europe has moved on from Brexit. It was a surprise in Ireland because we're still very much involved in thinking about it. But I do think that the EU needs the UK on defence. And I think the UK needs Europe on economic reasons. So there are pathways there that may be convoluted and difficult. But I do think that is also that through the defence vehicle, there will be ways of bringing us to a closer working relationship. I'm not talking now about anything beyond that, but I think it will make sense in the future. So I think it will be as difficult and probably more difficult than it has always been. But my experience is that it's only when the chips are down that the Europeans really understand what matters and find a way to move forward.
Thank you very much, Catherine and Marco, for being relatively optimistic.
I also used to say we have a duty of optimism.
Yes.
I take that seriously.
There's a lot of expertise in the room and also online, because welcome to those of you who are watching online. But before I throw the floor over, let me ask one question of my own about the economic philosophy of the European Union. Catherine, when I first met you, you were in the cabinet of Leon Britton. And according to the Delors cabinet, you were high priestess of Anglo-Saxon economic liberalism. That's what they branded you as. And you certainly maintained the flag of economic liberalism throughout your career in the Commission, including when you were Secretary General for many years. Marco, you were in charge of economic policy more recently, well, fairly recently, until only a few years ago, having done many years as Director General for Economics. My question is this for both of you. The world has become more focused on security of supply, the need for security of supply, rather than just pure market economics and pure competition policy, and more focused on some of these security issues. The whole world has moved in that direction, away from market economics, and globalization is arguably in retreat in some respects. There's less free trade than there used to be, less growth in free trade than there used to be. When I was in Brussels a few weeks ago, I saw a Director General of one of the economic directorates general I said, "Are you worried about this?" And he said, "No, he's not worried because the world has changed and you have to think about security and defence and these issues much more than free trade. And the world has changed, and that's just stuff. And we're all going to be a bit more focused on security, less focused on efficiency, less focused on free trade, even if the cost to our economies is considerable and we're all a bit poorer as a result." Do you think this shift is inevitable, and do you think that will the Commission try and resist this shift towards security at the expense of economic liberalism, or am I exaggerating the point? Perhaps am I going too far in the way I see the world changing? Can the Commission do anything to stop this happening? Basically, and to put it rather simply, we're all a bit close to the Delors cabinet now than the Britain cabinet, and that it seems from a French point of view, that's we're all a bit more French than we used to be. Let me go to Marco first. How does it look to you, Marco?
Okay, no, thank you very much. I mean, I think if you look from an economic viewpoint, strategic viewpoint, after COVID, we have the return of trade-offs. I mean, during COVID, it looked as if the gates were was open a bit for everything, and now what we have seen since then, we have the return of let's say a macroeconomic trade-off, and here the tension between growth and inflation. Now we seem to have passed the peak of inflation, but there was a return of inflation after many years. I think in front of us here the issue of stagnation is more important than inflation. The second one is a sustainability trade-off, and here the tension is between environmental, social, and fiscal. I think the perception, at least, that we have not paid sufficient attention to the social economic implication of the especially the green transition, I think is something that is affecting now the debate now and the priorities, let's say, on competitiveness and productivity, but also the social implications. And the third trade-off, I think one can call it, let's say, allocation trade-off, and this is the tension between efficiency and security. For efficiency, one would want to have long value chains. So you import from wherever it is more convenient. So you bet on efficiency. Security implies instead that one would want to shorten the value chains because, as was the case with vaccines and essential components, or the critical raw material now. I mean, if you rely constantly on something that can be weaponized, then you are potentially incurring a problem. So I think that this final trade-off here, I think, is what will determine the policy choices in the next year or so. And I think the prime on security is important. This implies that also considering what may be forthcoming from the other side of the Atlantic, the EU should definitely invest more with the global South, and in a biounivocal. So I think basically it implies that we are a continent of transformation. So we do not have much energy so far. And that's why we have to continue to invest in the renewables, and we do not have raw material. These countries from the global South, I think they need technologies. So I think there is an element of exchange that can be exploited. I think let me just conclude with one observation. I mean, if you realize it, I mean, since the beginning of our conversation, we are putting the emphasis on security, defense, external, foreign policy, which are matters on which the EU or the Commission has, little competence. I think, okay, it is inevitable because that's where the priorities clearly are now. At the same time, I think it would be a dramatic mistake if we do not do what is needed within the competence that we have. I mean, we have the two reports by Letta and Draghi on the single market. So what needs to be done still on that front? And we cannot leave EMU and the euro on clay feet. I mean, there is the issue of a banking union. There is the issue of capital market union. I know they tend to be sometimes impervious politically, but if we do not solidify ourselves, strengthen ourselves on that matter in a world that is, as you said, Charles, is becoming, it's also economically more, complicated. If we do not strengthen our, our institutional and legal and economic base on that front, I think we can venture into new areas, foreign policy, security, defense, but we will be essentially weak because we have not solved the key problems that we have at home.
Thank you. Catherine, do you worry about the trend to industrial policy?
Well, I hope I've mellowed with age. So from being ultraliberal, I consider myself now to be liberal. And I think it's a question of degree, because I think globalization has been very important for Europe. And I think it's even more important for the developing world. So I don't think we should or can turn our backs completely on it. I think it's a question of, I don't believe that European trade policy was ever naive, as some would like to say it. But, and I think we went the wrong way about it, because we moved from having fairly purely free trade agreements to having all kinds of other conditions attached as well. So we need to revisit what are we actually trying to achieve. But I don't think Europe can just close its borders. And I think of course, we will have to deal with what, not only what comes from the United States to Europe, but also wider US policy vis-a-vis China, etc., what the repercussions will be for Europe. But I agree with Marco. I think we have to work harder to build relations with the global South. I think that a lot of the world would like if Europe could cut out the lectures and deliver the substance, I think a lot of the world would like what Europe has to offer. Europe has always liked a multipolar world, and I don't think that we should necessarily move away from that. And I think there's a danger of us looking just as a first world bloc at how to organize the world between us and ignoring the people outside of that first world bloc, and that's not realistic anymore. So I think it will be a question of degree. I think we do need to pay attention to security. I think the energy crisis, the raw materials crisis, those have shown us that we can't be totally dependent on parts of the world that are not reliable ultimately. So I think a degree of adjustment is needed, maybe some smarter policies in key areas. But basically, I hope and believe that Europe will still stay more open to the rest of the world because we need to, than maybe the United States at the moment feels it can. It was always more isolationist. It's maybe going back to its deeper roots. But Europe has always been open to the wider world, and I think we just have to find new ways of doing it. And we may have to eat a bit of humble pie in the process, or we may have to adjust the ways that we do things. But I think we still need to remain open to the wider world, and that it will be to our benefit. But that's why difficult issues like migration we have to tackle, and we've just been running away from it. So we need to tackle it.
Thank you. Let's take several points from the floor and our online guests as well. Helga Schmidt, not the former Secretary of the External Action Service, but one from ARD broadcaster, has put in a question. Would you like to ask your question, Helga? Can you hear us, Helga?
Hello, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Do ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry. I'm calling from Brussels and I'm working for ARD, German broadcaster. So in the first place, thank you very much for the opportunity. I have been to Strasbourg and I'm really happy for your profound analysis of everything that happened there. And I would exactly like to come back to the Commission's support in Parliament, because obviously we have never had a Commission that had so little support from Parliament. And not even the Christian Democrats voted fully for the von der Leyen Commission. A fifth did not. The socialists were fragmented. The Greens were fragmented. Only the liberals, I think only the liberals were the party family that really was supporting von der Leyen Commission. So what do you think? What is the majority President von der Leyen can rely on? Is it a von der Leyen majority with the Greens, or a Manfred Weber majority without the Greens, so with parts of ECR on the right side of the EPP? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll turn now to Andrew Duff, former MEP. Andrew.
Yes, thank you very much. It's right to, I just can speak. I don't need a microphone. Is that right?
I think no, you think you don't.
I think so.
Oh, I will just speak. First of all, I agree that the Parliament failed to exercise proper quality control when in the hearings of the Commission. There are at least, in my view, 3 or 4 members of the college who ought not to have been approved. And if you want to know who they are, we can have a discussion afterwards. But the cause of this failure of Parliament to exercise its proper grip upon the hearings is because of the power of the EPP group. The EPP group is now pivotal to absolutely everything that is going to happen in this new Parliament. It can choose to form a majority on the right or on the left. We have never been in such a position before, and it remains to be interesting to see how coherent the EPP group is as it approaches lawmaking. Secondly, on treaty stuff, I understand that the president is thinking of recreating a think tank inside the Parliament as a sort of BEPA or of that ilk that in the previous 5 years it has lacked. And the principal purpose
the
of
Commission or the Parliament?
sorry, the Commission.
You said the Parliament.
Did I?
Yes.
That the president of the Commission is thinking of establishing a core group in the services whose primary purpose, as I appreciate it, is to prepare for possible constitutional change. It isn't a thing that von der Leyen feels personally very comfortable with, but it is a thing which I think she now understands that this commission is to be obliged to address more seriously than the previous one. And we are going to get a taste of that in her pre-enlargement papers that have been promised in the spring that are almost completed, as I understand it. They include scrutiny of common policies, but also of institutions in preparation for the accession of the Ukraine. And increasingly, I feel that the discussion is focusing on the concept of a fast track accession for the Ukraine, which will bring on these issues, fundamental issues, quite urgently.
John P. from The Economist.
Sorry, if I can go more parochially back to the UK for one moment. I agree with both the speakers that if Europe is building a defence role for itself, it makes no sense to do that without the UK. And I think that is widely recognised. And Marco put forward one way of involving the UK. My question is, there was a time, I think back in the early Brexit negotiations when Theresa May sort of hinted that the UK might use its defence role to extract a better deal elsewhere from the European Union, and it was rather sort of, promptly squashed as a notion. But I'm wondering whether the UK might be able to do the same thing now, under Starmer, use Europe's desire for a bigger British role in defence to extract a better deal economically and on trade issues elsewhere.
Let's take one more question for this round from Carsten from Teneo.
Thanks, Charles. Are we really being realistic, or maybe being too optimistic, if we assume that Costa von der Leyen can make up for the lack of coordination and leadership between France and Germany? And further to that, if you look at Mercosur, isn't another way of looking at it as a simple tit for tat between France and Germany? France had its way with the EV tariffs, and Germany said in return, well, then we need to open up new markets, and if need be, both decisions are being taken by QMB. So isn't a more adversarial way of trading these deals between France and Germany, wouldn't that be the more realistic thing that we have to get used to for the time being? Thank you.
Let's go in inverse order. Catherine, if you'd like to pick up those points first, then we'll move back to Marco.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think my view on the Commission support in the Parliament is, it's nice to have a big majority, but as long as you can put a majority together, that's all that matters. And I think it will be more topic related. There's a lot of worrying across Europe that the Parliament will go always with the right and not necessarily with the left. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it will depend on the issue. So I think you'll see, as you have always done, kind of shifting coalitions, sometimes with the parties of the left, sometimes with the right. Everything will be kind of nail biting, because will they get the votes together or not? But I think in the end, if the proposals make some kind of sense, then they will find a majority for them. Obviously, if they don't, they won't. And I think, I have always felt that it's wrong to rush to treaty change as a solution to when Europe isn't working, which is what people have done so much in the past. I think it's better to make the case for, we want to do this, but we can't because we don't have the powers, or the treaty doesn't allow us. But I've never prevailed with that argument. And I think if we're going to have another 9 countries join the Union, even if it's not going to be that soon, we do have to look at some of the governance. And if you have a fast track for Ukraine for political reasons, it's very difficult now for a country to join a highly integrated structure. When, if you go back to when Spain and Portugal joined, we still had import controls, etc. They were able to join and have a kind of transition period inside the Union. That's not possible anymore. So the architecture of something like that is going to be much more difficult. But I think it's right in the end that the political priorities should prevail over the structures. The structures are there to serve, but it will take a lot of political convincing to do it, both with and without treaty change, I think. And on the last point, I didn't mean to say, I hope it wasn't understood to mean that if von der Leyen and Costa agree on something, they'll plonk it on the table and the others will go, oh yes, that's so clever, why didn't we think of that? What I meant to say was, if they put something sensible on the table, of course the first reaction in all the member states and the Parliament will be to tear it apart and say, oh, you stupid people, you haven't understood anything on de la loi. But then gradually, as they come back to, well, maybe that bit's not too bad and this bit's not too bad, it would get the debate going in a more structured sense than if everybody just goes through meetings and says, oh, we're in crisis and it's all terrible, woe is us, what are we going to do? And then it'll take another 6 months for something to come out. And I really see that as being the role of the institutions. They'll have to read the member states, read the Parliament, read the problems, look into what does our toolbox enable us to do, and come with intelligent, maybe out of the box solutions to say, well, we could put this and this together, but it's going to take money and there's going to be a lot more qualified majority voting. I think the days of when we had the luxury of saying we wait another 6 months for the last one to come on board because we want to be a family where everybody agrees and because they will have to implement it when they go home afterwards and we want them to implement it. I think those days have probably run out and it will have to be short and sharp now, which is why you see a lot of the smaller countries trying to pre-agree things and say we 9, we 12, in order to have a substantial voice in the discussions. So I think the decision making will adjust to it, but one thing Europe is going to have to do is to get quicker at deciding.
Marco, any thoughts?
Yes, I I think on the majorities in the European Parliament, I mean, it is clear that the majority in the it's not like in national parliaments, you know, when you have always or most of the time the same established majority. There is never been the case so far. At the same time, in a sense, the eroding of the traditional center, let's put it like that, has started a bit too early. Now, I think the key issue where we will see variable majorities, but in particular the EPP looking to the right, is on the Green Deal. We have seen it already on the vote on deforestation, where the EPP has aligned with the right and the extreme right. I mean, there is an EPP question here. The EPP is a dominating force. You will see now in the, you know, I don't want to make parallels that are unholy, but you know, like in the US, you have an alignment here between of powers between a number of prime ministers or heads of state in the European Council, in the Commission, commissioners in the Commission, and the majority in the European Parliament. So the EPP is a dominating force. It is the only party actually that is properly organized. You know, they have the research center, they have a think tank, and they have a stronghold on you know, in Brussels. At the same time, clearly there are different views. We have, and those of the generation of Catherine and myself still remember the EPP of the old times as the most pro-European party around. And now it is clearly not the case anymore. And I have to say that sometimes dynamics related to you know, their internal disconnections with role of the Popular Party in Spain, who is the most tribal of all, I think has led to consequences. Sometimes you have seen, you know, the national takes has you know, wagged the dog of European you know, European affairs. So I think the EPP has a bit of midlife crisis that with all its strength will have to clarify. Now, on the Franco-German engine, I think when these two countries and the leaders have a long horizon, so they are able to look through the short-term tensions, I think they help to do good things. And you can see that going back to the past, the internal market, the euro, more recently Next Generation EU, when they have a short-term horizon and they're focused on you know, national emergencies, then they reproduce in Europe bad things. And you know, a very recent example is in the response to the energy crisis, you know, post-COVID, etc., they both have insisted on using state aid, you know, loosening the state aid regime much more than doing things collectively at the European level. I think there is a bit of poetic justice here, and France will not be able to follow that, you know, that path in the next. In the near future, because of the you know, problems that they have also on the public finance side. I think on the Mercosur, I said it before, I think is potentially an important decision. It is an important decision in the message it gives to the rest of the world, that we are there. We certainly stand by multilateral institutions, but given their, you know, inner crisis, we are ready to create a multilateral system bottom up with decisions like this. And that are courageous. I hope they have to be ratified. We'll have to see what happens there, but potentially is is an important decision, provided that is not just a way to lean on the on the German side of continuing to have a business model which is very much driven by net exports.
Thank you. Catherine, you want to come back to John P?
I did, because I didn't comment. I think the EU wants to have a closer relationship with the UK, and I think the UK needs it, and some of the UK wants it. I think it would be a big mistake, though, to try to go back to the traditional trading one thing for the other. I think the UK also needs the European Union and wider Europe to have a strong defence policy and capability. And I think if we approach it as issues of mutual need and mutual help, it will help build the kind of climate of confidence that will be much more productive in terms of wherever the UK wants to go with Europe in the future. There will be limits, because it can't be membership light. Even if we design something like that for Ukraine, it won't suit the UK. But I think we need to rebuild the common understanding that we had. And I think it can come very much through working together on defence and seeing that we are mutually dependent, that neither of us can really do as well as we apart as we could do together. And just that long road back, which, having built some confidence, would then maybe enable things to be possible tomorrow that are not today. So I would really, argue against trying to weaponize defence, if I could put it like that, but certainly to build on it and to use it as a confidence building measure.
Yeah, I've got two people want to speak online. In a moment, Malcolm Harbour, but also Graham McMillan sent in a question in the chat function. I assume you prefer to put it yourself, Graham, so I'll give you the chance to put it yourself. If you don't, I'll read it out. But firstly, I'll turn to Malcolm Harbour.
I'm unmuted, yes.
Malcolm,
good afternoon. Yes,
Malcolm.
Malcolm.
One of our best experts on the civil market.
Yes, that's right. I was chairman of internal market when I worked closely when Catherine was Secretary General, and indeed was very generous of her time in actually regularly meeting my members, which was much valued and showed that sort of level of collaboration. So my question is related to a broader single market question, that there have been suggestions, I think as yet unconfirmed, that Mrs. von der Leyen may set up a special task force to implement the recommendations of the Draghi and Letta reports, which are very complementary, I think. And I'd like to know really what the panelists think about this as an idea, and just with a short reminder that it does parallel a bit of the Lisbon strategy of the Barroso Commission, as the first Barroso Commission, if I recall, where I think that his Lisbon strategy for competitiveness attracted, I think, a lot of serious work on it. And for example, in Parliament, we actually set up a special committee, of which I was a member, to go through and respond to that. And that seems to me would focus attention really on one of the key challenges that the European economy has at the moment.
Okay, Graham, would you like to read out your question yourself, or do you want me to read it out? Let's give Graham a chance to come online if he wants to.
You can go ahead, Charles.
Okay, thank you. Well, what do you think the UK and the EU can achieve with the proposed UK-EU reset next year? How do you see it playing out, and in which areas might there be progress and which areas will there be blockages? That sort of follows on from the last question. So anyone else want to ask a question in this round? Yes, I see Stephen Castle from the New York Times.
Quick one, if you could talk a little bit about how well equipped the Commission is to deal with Trump 2.
That's a good question. Okay. Let's go first to Marco, and then to Catherine. Marco and Catherine can be fairly brief in answering these questions, so we've got time for another round. Marco, have a go at any of those you want to pick up.
Very quickly. I think I'll take the one on Draghi. Maybe a word on Trump, if you allow me. Okay, on Draghi, I said it before. Clearly, the report is 400 pages, so it's not, and it has hundreds of specific proposals. So it cannot be taken as a blueprint for everything. At the same time, I think it has an internal logic that is that in a sense ensures the consistency of the approach and the proposals. What should one avoid, I think, is to, as I mentioned at the very beginning, is to pick and choose things that are easier to do and leave out what is more difficult to do. Clearly, I think what has attracted a lot of attention is the 800 billion additional investment. I think probably the number is also methodologically one can dispute and all the rest. I don't think it's so much a question of a specific number, but certainly one has to convey EU resources, national resources, public and private, towards the productivity element. Now, I think there is one issue that I think Draghi does not have, which I think is important in my view, and it is that I mean, he insists a lot on regulation, insists a lot of investment and all the rest. I think the social balance may be not fully there, in a sense that you have the US as benchmark and you aspire to that. I don't think there is in Europe the political stomach to go all the way in that, let's say, in that direction. So a proper balance between what you do on the competitiveness, productivity side, on the efficiency element, has to go hand in hand with the social element and the equity considerations, also because you have to equip the human resources to deliver on the double transition, and you have to have a welfare system that works on that front well. And I don't think it is a political equilibrium to have okay, you do unpleasant thing at the European level, and then you pick up the pieces at the national level. That it doesn't work. Yes, no, I think on Trump, very quickly we'll have to see what he does. I think we need to be ready. With Trump, the US seem to not to come from Mars anymore. They come from Mercury. Being mercurial, even though Mercury is the god of commerce and trade. So maybe there eventually they will see the light. But I think one has to show that we pull up together instead of going into a procession to Luxembourg, to Washington separately in order to spare the camembert of the Prosecco from the sanctions. I think that would be a big mistake.
Yes.
Thank you, Malcolm. I'm a fan of task forces because I think it allows you to overcome the rigidities of the system and put people together to work towards a goal. But I would see that with the Lisbon strategy, what I think Marco and I found worked well was when you had the head of cabinet and the directors general involved from the beginning. So you were getting both the technical and the political working together. So it wasn't a surprise at the end. You were buying in the agreement as you went along. And I think, it could easily be a role for one or two of the executive vice presidents to take the entire Draghi and Letta reports and to work through it and to see what would the Commission want to recommend on the basis of that. But that's just one way of doing things, but I think it could be productive. On the UK-EU reset, apart from defence, which you already talked about, I do see the veterinary phytosanitary agreement as being in the mutual interest. Now, the devil is in the detail, as you always say, but I think that that's a clear example of something that would be in everybody's interest. And on Trump 2, I think, first of all, Trump 2 is going to be unpredictable in the beginning. And I think the EU will have to do a mixture of explaining, cajoling, persuading, and standing up. So if there are tariffs against the EU, DG Trade will certainly have its list to come right back at the US. And I think it's going to be a combination of the two. What does worry me is what Marco just said at the end, is individual European prime ministers and foreign ministers not getting the message and running out, not only to save the camembert and the Prosecco, but also making all kinds of outlandish offers that what Europe could do without having consulted any of their European partners. So a degree of speaking with one voice, which is what would be required in such a situation, I think is probably beyond us at this stage. But it may appear eventually to be more advisable than maybe people would think at the beginning, because there's only strength in numbers, the numbers of the economy. There isn't strength in any individual country threatening or offering whatever it likes if it can't deliver the rest of the union.
We've got time for another round of questions. Can I see any hands or either online or offline would like to? Okay, I can see. And feel free to ask second questions if you've already asked one. So firstly, Nick Collier from the corporation, then Nick Westcott, formerly of the External Action Service.
Thanks. One quick comment. I saw David McAllister last week in Strasbourg, who, Catherine, banned the word reset in terms of the UK-EU relationship. I was no reset, no renegotiation. Anyway, my question is to go back really to what Marco was just saying about the trade-offs. And I guess my question is specifically, where do you think von der Leyen will come out on this trade-off, which you've talked a bit about, on the kind of green transition and the burden on business? So the German EPP view, indeed the view many in German industry, is we need to act now to reduce the burden on the corporate sector. So things like, to use the, sorry for the jargon, the CSRD, the reporting regulation, the CSDDD, the supply chain regulation, those two plus some in the commission are saying the taxonomy regulation. And she's used, I think she used the phrase an omnibus, did she? She used an omnibus, which you don't get you started, Andrew, on that. On what an omnibus would mean. But is that, where do you think she stands? Because we've asked we and my stakeholders have asked a number of different departments, and nobody knows what it means.
Okay, Nick Westcott first.
When I first went to Brussels, Delors was in his pomp, and he had this cellule de prospective, looking at sort of future challenges, which were almost entirely internal. And I wonder the extent to which over the next 4 or 5 years, it will actually be the external world imposing itself on European decision-making because of disorder at the borders. And that this will actually distract a lot of attention from the necessary internal reforms and push people particularly towards trying to tackle the defence industry issues that will remain quite sensitive for national governments and therefore difficult for the EU to coordinate.
Just return firstly, Catherine, then Marco for those two questions. And I've got a last question if nobody else has one. Catherine,
I'm tempted to make a flippant reply to Nick and to say, well, there's a woman in charge, so she can multitask. You know, I think that the EU is going to have to do both. I mean, internal and external. And we used to say in preparing for European councils that they could only deal with one issue per meeting, and that was true, and I think is still true. But you have to put the right issue to them, but they might have to get better at dealing with 2 issues per session. Because and it will turn out to be the same issue because the internal and the external are being blended together. I mean, migration is a good example. Yeah. Europe needs migration for its prosperity, but it can't face up to that yet. So we will have to have a real debate about it. We've talked about, you know, what kind of trade, how far can we go with protection or not go with protection. Those are the 2 sides of the same coin. So, and again, I think the good preparation of those discussions and really listening to the member states, but also pointing out to them that however they look at it, the problem is actually bigger for Europe and they have to be part of the solution. I think that will be a lot of work. On the sort of green versus business, I think a lot of the EU legislation has become too burdensome, that I would agree. But I also know from bitter experience, trying to dismantle any of it is extremely difficult. Or trying to get the last person in the compromise to withdraw their amendment so that it can be a lighter regulation or whatever is extremely difficult. So there'll have to be a lot of work on it. I think if there was more trust between member states, then I think you could have lighter regulations. Part of the problem is the member states don't trust each other to deliver, and the Commission doesn't trust. And I think it's really sad that we've gone from a situation where, you know, member states agree something together and they should go home and implement it. Now they have to be fined in the European Court repeatedly to get them to live up to the commitments that they've made. So it's all part of, if you like, having another go at what are we trying to do here, what is the minimum rather than the maximum that will allow us to achieve the EU objective. And I'm not terribly optimistic. I think the omnibus will be something that might, I don't know, maybe alleviate the reporting obligations for small countries. Omnibus will be something that would be cross-cutting rather than having to go through topic by topic. But maybe the world has improved since I left, but undoubtedly it has. But I think good luck with actually getting results out of that. Even the thing in itself could become a juggernaut that weighs everything down. So it's a noble ambition, but I just think realizing it is very difficult.
Right. Malcolm, do you want to comment on those 2 points?
Just a word on the green transition. I hope, okay, I don't know what is going to happen. I think the dynamics between the president and the first executive vice president, Teresa Ribera, is going to be interesting to look at. We have seen signals already somewhat, trying to pull a bit the blanket a bit more on one side or the other side. I think basically, if going down to the fundamentals, I hope that in shaping the European position on this issue, that we take into account of 2 elements. The first, as it stands, the European business model is not sustainable. I mean, you cannot go on relying on imported energy, on being trapped into mature technologies for most of Europe, and relying on demand from the rest of the world. We are a big area, and we have to have more, let's put it like, more indigenous growth. And I think the issue of the green transition is very much related to the reshaping of the European business model. The second point is on the green transition is one area where we have the potential, and we have the potential in the future to lead the world. So, I mean, the issue of European leadership in this, in the new global governance, I think is very much on that front there. And I think there is a potential for cooperating also with partners like China or the Global South in delivering the green transition. So how can we work together in spite of all the tensions that we have on the security side, on the defense and all the rest? How can we cooperate to deliver a global public good, which is the green transition and the net zero, when the US is withdrawing on that front? So I think here the role of Europe in the world, I think, will also pass by this, restating that this is a priority. Then if there is obviously things to be adjusted, I think one can do that. The issue of compatibility between this and the competitiveness one can discuss, but I think it would be a strategic mistake to backpedaling on that front.
Thank you. We've got 5 minutes left. I want to finish on time. I can see. Let's have quick questions from Malcolm Harbour. I'll read out his question to save time. From Andrew and from Simon Nixon, then from myself very briefly. So Malcolm's second question is, does the European patent, where the UK is a member, offer an enhanced cooperation model which could be applied to other focused agreements, including the UK? Simon.
Yeah, I had just 2 quick questions. Firstly, both talked about lack of leadership in the EU, but to what extent do you think the growing sort of populism or far-right, pro-Russia, however you want to call it, on the sort of on the Eastern and Central European countries, might that complicate decision-making on a lot of these dossiers? And secondly, I'm just interested if you could just say a bit more about how you think the EU would respond to pressure from Trump over China. Would that split the EU, and would it make it harder? Would it cause problems in the EU-UK relationship too, given that the UK will obviously side with the US?
I'm not sure it's obvious, but maybe you're right.
Andrew, yes, I'm just wondering if Catherine especially would care to comment on the partnership between the Commission and the External Action Service, which appears to be deteriorating.
That leads on to my last question of all, which is on the External Action Service. Over the last 5 years, Mrs. von der Leyen has muscled into EU foreign policy making and done things that strictly, according to the treaty, should be done by the High Rep for Foreign Policy or by the President of the European Council. She had a bit of an excuse because the President of the European Council was a very weak individual and the High Rep was fairly weak and said some controversial things. But do you think with Costa and Callas, the new team that in charge of the respective institutions across the road from the Commission, do you think Mrs. von der Leyen will allow them some breathing space and let them play the role that the treaties assigned to them? So would firstly Catherine, then Mark, I'd like to pick up any of those questions, maybe not all of them, but some of them, then we'll wrap things up. Catherine first.
Well, I'm afraid I don't know very much about the European patent, so I won't say anything about that. Right. On the populism, I think it is worrying. It's kind of domestic populism pushed by Russia in Central and Eastern Europe. But I come back to something I said at the outset. I think every member of the EU understands that it's an existential question for them. So I think in the end, solutions will be found to keep the union together. It will maybe strain it to almost breaking point, but I think both individual countries will back down if they're really being shown the door, like if that ever comes to pass. And also there is an exhaustible amount of room for compromise, but the limits are quite far. So I think we'll still be able to make it work. On the partnership between the Commission and the EAS, I'm not sure that it's actually deteriorating. I think they both have discovered how to work with each other. And I think, again, the internal and the external are much more closely integrated than ever before. So I think with a strong president like von der Leyen, I think she and Callas will have to explore and maybe test how to work together. I think Callas will be very focused on defense and Russia and all of that side, perhaps less on the wider international issues. So I do see the President of the Commission stepping into that arena and really challenging her, again, if she has good solutions to offer or she shows that she has the leadership. So I think it will work out pragmatically.
Okay, thank you. Marco, last comment from you, please.
Yes, populism again. I think the populists and Trump hate the EU for very natural reasons. I mean, the EU, think about it in terms of the main competencies that we have. We are basically there to bring, to bring down barriers. So competition policy, internal market, trade, but also to a certain extent fiscal rules. So they are all, I mean, I think they are essential, but they are a bit on the harsh part of the equation. Now, looking forward, I ask a deep fundamental question. Is this model here, which is what we have carried with us, is this a political equilibrium? Tommaso Padoa-Schioppa, I mean, I have hold the chair now of the European Institute in his honor, say, okay, he said, okay, discipline is for the EU, promoting growth and social objectives is for the member states. He criticized that as being something not sustainable. Now, we have obviously the cohesion policy, all this is very important, but I think at the end of the day, the perception that we have this type of bias, I think is there. And I have to say that having lived in the Commission and now outside, but very close in the past couple of years, I think we lost the opportunity on promoting next generation EU as a big achievement. And the fact that nobody really owns next generation EU, and we have been very shy in promoting it. I think is we pay that I think politically. Finally, on the pro-Russia constituency, I think at the end, this in a sense anticipates a bit what we are going to have in the debate on enlargement, Ukraine and the others. I mean, we cannot we are not going to be able to function properly in EU with 35 plus members with the current rules. Well, I mean, the risk here is to end up with decision-making paralysis. Now, we are very ingenious in Brussels in overcoming obstacles of that sort. So you have during the European Council, all of a sudden, you know, Orban takes, you know, has to go for some emergency outside the room, and we profit from that. I think there are other ways to, you know, a bit by stealth bypassing the unanimity. But I think we need, at the end of the day, bite the bullet and also, you know, look at the treaty. In the meantime, I think a lot can be done. We have the, you know, enhanced cooperation has certain limitations, but can be used. But especially in the security area, that, as we discussed at the beginning, I think Schengen-type agreements are probably also a way for, you know, spontaneous generation of options and way forwards on that front, which is not strictly within the boundaries of the current institutional setting. But we will need to be inventive a bit on this and imaginative, and I think a way of, as we said, way of involving the UK, you know, would have to rely on some institutional imagination.
Thank you very much. It's 2 minutes to 3, so we finished within our time, which is great. Thanks so much to our friends at the Hans Seidel Foundation for joining with us in this event. Thanks above all to Marco and for Catherine for, in one case traveling, in the other case trying to travel here to be with us today. I mean, the conclusion I draw is the European Commission remains a very important, fascinating, interesting, sometimes frustratingly annoying institution, but we can't do without it. If it didn't exist, we'd have to invent something rather similar to it. And the fact that Marco and Catherine have bothered to be with us today shows that they haven't given up entirely on the cause of keeping some expertise and well-informed opinion in the UK. Thank you very much to them. Let's give them a round of applause.